moderator for our panel discussion, my dear friend Gloria Young. Gloria is the president of Young and LeMay Associates. She has over 25 years of experience working for public sectors and as a management consultant in both the public and private sectors. Young was appointed by Governor Newsom to the California Workforce Development Agency in 2019. Young is a member of Board of Directors of the Institute of Cultural Engagement, New One Scheme, and a past member of Advisory Council. Young served as a clerk to the board and legislative administrator for the city and the county of San Francisco for 9 years. She was the first woman and the first person of color in that highly influential position, leading the entire legislative branch. Young also worked for City of Palo Alto for 25 years. Young held elective office on the Santa Clara Board of Education for 13 years. Young is also the author of Knowledge Management Tales, The Tale of Two Cities, from San Francisco to Johannesburg. She's also the one who taught me the important word, Ubuntu. That means I am because you are, or you are because I am. That is so important for us to get to know each other. She's truly an inspiration to me. And right now I'm going to give the microphone to Gloria Young and to lead this panel. Gloria, microphone is yours. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Diana, for putting together this incredible event. I'd like to thank the Honorable Assemblyman Lee and Stephen and Sandy for their previous remarks. I thought it's been a profound discussion to this point. And I thank you that we have a fabulous panel that will discuss our differences in terms of culture and then also our common ground. This is an opportunity for us to have a dialogue between our two communities. This is our journey of opportunity to share, discern, gain wisdom and knowledge about our cultures, the Asian Americans and the African Americans. This is breaking down the walls that separate us and attacking ignorance, denial, silence, and anger. We have allotted an hour for this panel discussion. And so I will ask each panelist to introduce themselves.
I can't hear.
And you can't hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Okay. All right. Let me go back to the video. We have allotted 1 hour for this conversation, and I will ask each panelist to introduce themselves and to answer the question that I will pose. So I will call on each of you to introduce yourselves, and you will have 3 minutes for your introduction, as well as a response to this following question. Given our history of survival in the United States for Asian Americans and African Americans, how did we get here? To a place where there is fear, stereotyping, separation, distrust, disrespect, tension, and yes, violence. Taipei, will you please get us started in this conversation?
Thank you, Gloria.
Introduce yourself.
First of all, I appreciate the invitation to participate in this groundbreaking effort, and a little bit about myself. I spent several decades working in city government, both in the city of Oakland as well as the city of San Francisco. I've also served in other cities in Alameda and Contra Costa County. Primarily, most of my time was spent around the issues of land use, having served in the planning departments in all of these cities. In doing so, in helping to form policy regarding land use controls, I have dealt with a variety of ethnic communities, both in the city of San Francisco and the city of Oakland. And so, working in the community is something that I value a great deal. And it's something that I think is also important that I continue to participate in these discussions, because it helps me to communicate to my small network in my community, because I think that's what all of us have to do. Now, how did we get to this? I think that clearly Assemblyman Lee spoke to a great deal of the issues. And given that we do have an hour, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot that's going to be contributed here, I won't repeat what he said, because I agree with most of it. And there is no one place that you can put all of the blame, but I think that a great deal of the blame could be placed in several areas. And one of those is obviously the media has misrepresented this, has highlighted the nature of this in an inaccurate way. And of course, while most of the media that has presented this has presented the issues related to violent crimes, and who is committing the crimes and what kind of crimes are being committed, I think are also being framed incorrectly as well. And again, while Assemblyman Lee spoke to the issue of Black Americans and the conflict with the Asian community, I think at the same time, we should not overlook that while violent crimes get the majority of the attention, the vast majority of the crimes that are being committed against Asian Americans are nonviolent, both in terms of verbal assault, shunning, harassment, things of that nature are just as prevalent, and we need to keep those in mind as well. Not only is the print media and TV misrepresenting this, but I really do believe that we should put a great deal of attention on social media, specifically social media from the perspective of people who follow Facebook, Twitter, and especially the apps that are of an international nature, because that's where the videos of the violent crimes have its most damning effects, because people tend to believe more what they see, regardless of what the social science is telling them. What they see is sensational. What they see really does generate a lot of attention. And what people are seeing is very, very disturbing. But I think that it obviously is not telling the entire story. But it is, again, more effective in this incorrect narrative, because, again, people believe what they see. And videos generally tend to confirm pre-existing prejudices and stereotypes that people have. And also, these videos tend to go viral, not just in the United States. They're spread throughout the world. And that generates even more tension, I think, because, again, it tends to give credibility to this narrative, which is not correct. I think we also need to make sure that we don't forget that we've had bad leadership as well, and that's contributed to this. Everybody knows what we've been faced with over the last 4 years, how leaders have essentially used this pandemic for political reasons, how it has ultimately turned into this weapon that has been aimed at Asian Americans incorrectly, and obviously in a very bad way. I also think that we're here in this position because it doesn't appear as though there are consequences for bad behavior. People seem to believe that they'll be able to get away with these violent and non-violent acts. And it generates people believing that if there's no consequences, I'm going to continue to do this freely. Needless to say, we all see it, and we all know the truths here.
Hello.
Again, the stats,
this is
the statistics
Thank
are there,
you, Jody.
but
Thank you, Hernan, for joining
the fact
us
of the
tonight.
matter is,
We are running a special program,
while it's important
a
to
civic leadership.
recognize what the current problems are and how we got here, I'm much more interested in talking about how we're going to get to a new place. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Gloria to allow others to contribute to this as well.
Gerald, we'll get to that question of where do we go from here. So thank you for your sharing. I appreciate that. Hai-Pei, are you available to speak? Let's see. Okay, Carl, could you share? introduce
Absolutely.
yourself and share. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm happy to follow my brother, Gerald here. My name is Carl Chan. I'm the president of the Oakland Chinatown Chamber of Commerce. I serve on many capacity. I'm also the board member for Visit Oakland. I'm also the board member of Asian Health Services, but also the chair for the Apapa Greater Oakland chapter. But among many things, the city of Oakland, but also China has been becoming the epicenter for this AAPI hate. But I just want to go back to the opening remark. I did mention about racism and what people do understand what racism is all about. But I want to go back to the history. And the first thing is, the question would be, do we know, who helped to build this country? But if your answer is saying that, oh, I understand because of slavery, because of African American, then you know the answer. However, in this country, in our history, we have many dark chapters of the history. But the thing is that we have to move on. And, the question would be, do we know that, many of our brothers and sisters, suffering the most in this country of racism is our Black community, and which we have to understand that. Now, I know that people also talk about, wow, you guys are doing pretty well because they watch a movie called Crazy Rich Asians. So they all thought that, we all coming out with, briefcase of cash and coming to this country. But in reality, it's not true. And we all started because, in China, and we want to have a better living. So we are asked to build, come to this country to build the Continental Railroad. Okay. Now, I just want to go back to history. Do many of you know what Chinaman's chance is all about? Some of you may have heard about the term, but some of you may not. Okay, so when Chinese people came to this country and to build the railroad, and they have to lower this little bucket, and so this Chinese guy can sit on this little bucket and stick this dynamite, so they blow the big hole. Now, if you're lucky enough, they can pull you fast enough to come back out, then you survive. If not, so that's our Chinaman's chance. So it's not, like, what people watch a movie, Crazy Rich Asians, but anyway, but one day before the Continental Railroad was completed, all Chinese, they were all fired just one day before that. So now that, the Chinese, they lost all their jobs, no place to stay. They stay in San Francisco, and at the end, at some point, it became what they call Chinatown, and because they could not find jobs, so we have to create our own jobs, and nobody wanted to, welcoming Chinese. And I know that, the mentioning about the lynching, but now that you go to San Francisco, you know that that's a Broadway, and back then, Chinese could not cross Broadway. If you did, you got beaten up or you got lynched. So, it's not easy. And however, I have to give a lot of credit. There are many people that have done so much, they have done a good job in helping the people of color, and have a voice. And it came from the Black leadership, especially, one of my idols, one of the people I respected the most, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So he was the one helping many of us having a voice. So which is very, very important. Now, I think we also need to talk about what happened now, because I know my brother Gerald talked about politics. Absolutely right, because now the previous president and also the rhetoric is about dividing the people, and we also need to understand the system of this country is finding ways to dividing the people. So I also want you to know that when there is a crisis, many of our minority communities are pinning against each other. However, we can do a better job when we understand the history and learning what is happening now, so we can move ahead to the future, so to be better of all of this, because we want to stop all this racism, we want to stop discrimination. But you got to start with whom? Us. You got to start with us, and you got to start now. So with that, I want to turn it back to Gloria.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you for giving us the history and bringing us to now. Hi, Pei, can you hear me? And are you ready to introduce yourself and share on the question?
Sure, yeah. My name is Hai-Pei Xu. I'm the president of the United Chinese Americans, or UCA, a national coalition and platform for Chinese Americans. Let me first set a stage for you about what recently had an incident that happened that put Chinese and the Black community on edge. Early in November, that is last month, a Chinese international graduate student of University of Chicago got killed for his cell phones. He's the only child of a divorced single mother who spent her whole life and savings to have prepared her son where she was before she was murdered. Only 6 months before that, at the same university, another Chinese international student, a graduate student, also got murdered or killed for robbery reasons. Then 1 week after that Chicago killing, a video went viral of 3 Black teenager girls racially bullied some Chinese boys on a Philadelphia train and violently beat up a Chinese teenager girl who dared to ask them to stop. Last week, Chinese communities on the East Coast has held a big protest rally in a very cold day. I was there. Some progressive Chinese called those who attended the rally, quote unquote, those are the conservative Chinese. You know, we have our own tension and fault line within our own community. So that's the background of the recent incident. So I'm just trying to convey a very unvarnished version of what has happened. I don't know how we get here, but there are many factors, of course. I think the first reason is the fast growth of AAPI community. AAPI tend to congregate in the cities and the bi-coasts, so we bump into each other more now than before. We're getting more and more into, the traditional quote unquote, the Black territory. So that's demographic. And as the wealth and jobs shift from city to the suburb and to the bi-coast, there's attendant loss of job and a gradual decay of urban settings, which is economic. And the third, I do think that there is a sociological and a cultural component to that. Breakup of the Black family, erosion of the influence of Black church, the flooding of the drug, and the shoot up of the crime, the culture of poverty. And yes, let's be honest, maybe there's also some wrong-headed leadership in the Black community. And the last and the fourth factor I would say is, let's face it, we do harbor discriminations, bias, prejudice, racism towards each other, despite of our best intent, especially those of us who are living in upper middle class of this country. I'm not so sure, I'm sure none of this is new to you. And you may or may not agree with my list. I myself is not quite sure about that myself, but I will stop here and let's wait until when we get to the solution part of our dialogue later on. Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. I'm Kim Shirobi, a native Detroiter, a community practitioner. I have lived in my neighborhood my entire life, almost 60 years, retired physical education teacher with Detroit Public Schools, and lastly, a member of the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center. So how did we get here? As you all can hear, and I'm sure many of you all know, it's very layered. It's very layered. It's very complex. But one of the things that I want to add to how we got here is a practicing and accepting a poor definition of success. And I think that has put a lot of strain on our relationships. Generally, Americans are considered successful when they have what I call stuff and status. Material things, high profile status, cars and expensive items, and oftentimes is at the expense of other people. And even if it means that people are in pain and suffering. And that pain and suffering normally is caused by systematic racism, oppression, and there's other kinds of, I should say, oppression that continues to cause us to be at odds with each other. And a lot of things have already been stated in terms of the, again, the media, how the media plays into this, how I should also add how we react and how we use our wealth, our stuff, and our status makes a big difference. And I'm really gonna stop there because I'm trying not to get into the solutions right now. I'm not trying to get into the solutions. So I'm gonna stop right there. But that's really where I think we've gotten caught up, is how we have embraced that definition of success and how we practice it too.
Thank you, Kimberly. I too want to move to where do we go from here? Piyush, would you please enter into our dialogue?
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Thank you for the invite. Wonderful to listen to all these esteemed panelists talk about the topic at hand, very important for civic leadership. Just to introduce myself, my name is Piyush Malik. I am an engineer turned management consultant turned social entrepreneur. Professionally, my day job is dealing with applied artificial intelligence and cloud and so on and so forth for Fortune 500 companies. But on the give back activities, I'm involved with a number of nonprofit organizations dealing with technology and entrepreneurship. So social entrepreneurship is my side hustle, but I'm spending good amount of my evenings and weekends being the president of American Society of Engineers of Indian Origin, which has the goal to inspire the next generation of technologists and scientists in not only Silicon Valley, but all over through our various professional and student chapters. Again, as this organization was formed 38 years ago to allow the immigrant Indian technologists and engineers to fit into the America of that time. And the America of that time was a lot different than America of today. There have been cases of racism being demonstrated against not only Chinese, not only Koreans, not only Africans, but against Indians as well. And you know, these things don't come to light until you face it yourself. And for me, I faced it right after 9/11. It was only a few years that I had been welcomed very warmly in Silicon Valley that 9/11 happened. And a day after that, obviously the nation was stunned. But I found my car vandalized with writings on my property saying, "Immigrant, go back." More recently, there have been cases where members of the Indian community who happen to wear a turban, they are called Sikhs, they have been attacked. Elderly people have been thrown on the streets and have been hurt very bad, thinking of them as Muslims, or again, being a racist culture here. There have been cases in Los Angeles where a old Latina lady, more than 75 years old, she was thought of as a Asian. She was, there were slurs against her. She was badmouthed and she was attacked. And even I've read reports of people being spitted at. These are inhuman deeds which cannot be tolerated in a civil society. And we all have to stand up against it. And today, I see us at an inflection point with social unrest, cultural intolerance, racism, gun violence, and all of these are, getting compounded during these last 2 years of COVID. It is something for which behooves us to think, how did we get here? And to address that question, Gloria, I would say we got here through the mistrust and fear mongering. We got here because the media, mainstream as well as social media, has a tendency to show what sells and sensationalize, and then there's partisan politics. So I hope today's dialogue is a step forward where we can not only understand the current situation, but we can come up with some solutions. And how do we coexist peacefully? How do we make progress? And how do we make sure everybody lives peacefully in society? Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Huge. And I'd like to call on Alex to close out this question by introducing yourself and sharing.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, great. Good evening to everybody. My name is Alex Anderson, and I am a community leader. I started my career on Wall Street, worked for some large firms, moved to the PE side, and raised quite a bit of capital through the years, and started working more specifically to raise the communities that had the least representation. And that's how I got my foray into kind of the social justice side. Begrudgingly, I have to agree with just about everything I've heard about how we got here. Especially, I think Haipe made some very salient and succinct comments about the African-American community. This has been a long going process for us. And you just have the communal breakup, you have the family breakup, you have the school to prison pipeline. You have welfare that no longer puts the man in the home, it actually pays for the separation, and just the list goes on. I'm fortunate that I didn't have that experience in having a robust family life, a mother and father who I just lost my father in 2020, early 2020, before COVID started. And it was fast. But the point I'm getting to is that I was raised in a community where the community had action and they had responsibility to one another. So when I went outside to cut my lawn, if Miss Washington's lawn needed to be cut, my mom would tell me to cut her lawn too. And the family was more than just the bloodline, it was the communal line. So my father spent 32 years in the Marine Corps. I've seen nothing but a rainbow of diversity. I've seen struggle, but I've seen nothing but a rainbow of diversity. When I went to the university, especially my upper division classes, I saw nothing but a rainbow of diversity. And so, and when I was growing up, we went to all kinds of restaurants. Some we experienced very distinct racism and discrimination, and others not so much. My father knew everybody. And in my family, we had some how do I want to say? We had some family that were kind of in the underworld, if you will. And I would walk the south side of Chicago with my grandmother, and my uncles and grandfathers' influence, who were part of that, that underworld, if you will, gave me a certain privy that, it's not as bad as, well, I'm not going to say that it's bad, but I'll just say that they would say, y'all, they would see me around and say, yeah, young buck, y'all keep on going, go on to school kind of thing. So I had a very different experience, but I knew that it was there. So my experience, and to the point that I'm sharing with how we got here, is that all of that was wiped away. The communities that I grew up in are no longer there. The insurance company that I used to take my grandmother's premium to is gone. The accounting firm that used to do the taxes for my aunt's shop is gone. When I got out of school, there were about 15 to 30 African-American owned financial services firms. They're all gone. It's a collision effect of what happens when you take away from a community and there's no succession. Now, fortunately, I've been very lucky because I'm on a board of the National Asian American Coalition. My broad experience has allowed me to attach myself to an Asian coalition. My other half is Asian. So I'm not unique, because there are a lot of interracial marriages between African Americans and Asians of a wide extent. But I recognize, to the question that has been answered by many of the panelists, the erosion of our community and our elders, our big mamas, as we would call them, is a direct answer to why we have kids running amok. And having children myself, I have to teach them to be careful, because I don't want them to be a victim, because they have parents that love them and a community that nurtures them, and that's not always consistent. So that's my answer to how did we get here.
Thank you so much, Alex. And I can't thank you enough for the comments that have been made and the conversation that has come about with how did we get here, dealing with things like land use and media and community displacement, violence, racism, our history, and capitalism. And before I move forward with the next series of questions, I'd just like to pause and just indicate to the audience that Hong will be handling questions from the audience after the panel discussion. And because of timing, I have several questions, about 2 or 3 more questions to ask the panel. And I would just ask that we're not going to go through all of you. You can choose which ones you want to answer, and we'll take a couple for each of those questions, because we want to leave time for where we go from here and have each one of you respond to that question. So the question that the next question relates to, and it's been brought up by Gerald and several others, how does racial propaganda hinder racial relationships rather than enhance it? And one view is looking through the lenses of the media that plays a large part in promulgating the issue of the racial divide. I will start with Kim.
So in terms of the media, and I'm honestly, Gloria, I'm kind of at a loss in terms of how that's done. So I'm going to pass. I'm really, I just went blank. So I'm going to pass and let somebody else answer that at this point. Thank you.
That's fine. Is there someone that wants to respond to that question about the racial propaganda?
Can I say something?
Yes, Haipei, and then we'll have Gerald follow you.
I really think this topic is in fact not that important. There are many other more important factors, political, sociological, cultural, economic, racial, that got into our relationship. Well, media may have played a role, but I personally wouldn't feel that it is one of the main culprits to be held responsible for what we are, where we are today. I think if we do that, we are whitewashing what's really going on. Thanks.
Thank you.
Gloria, if I may,
Yes, Tom.
Gloria, yes. So that question was also put on the Q&A directed to Gerald, Gerald Green.
Yes, Gerald will go next.
Yes. Okay. So
Right,
I would like to have a reverse to that.
Yeah,
question.
quickly, I'm not saying that the media has done a perfect job on this, and I do see there's room to improve. But the media is the media. They do their stories the way they want, and yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I can't dispute the point that the media is the only issue, and I can't dispute the fact that the media is the media. They have their own charge. They have to essentially make money for the corporations that keep those networks going. I think what we have to do is put pressure on the media to tell the stories in balanced ways. Yes, you can tell the stories about the sensational stories of the violence, but you also need to tell the stories about how the communities are working together. Don't just leave the impression that there's just violence going on. Try to communicate what else is going on, the work that is going on in the community to try to keep these two ethnic groups, as well as all the ethnic groups that generally live in the same communities together. Talk about some of the work that people like Carl Chan is doing. Let him come forward as he does as much as he can to talk and participate in these stories. The media does contribute to this, but I think we also have to take it upon ourselves individually to educate yourselves, in a way that allows you to understand where this information is coming from, and make sure that you try to see multiple sides of this argument and think for yourself. Don't just believe what's presented to you and what's being agreed upon, even by your friends or members of your family. Think for yourself. Have some understanding about other people so that you can generate compassion. I'm sure that Kimberly is going to talk a little bit about that. But if I can very quickly, not relying on the media. Generally, as we said before, this is the fact that the media has never gotten everything right. They didn't get the 1992 events around the riots in LA correct as well, and have promulgated an image that didn't exist, and are not even talking now about how those communities have worked together. It provides an example, I think, of how we can start working together, how the Korean and the African American communities began a journey in 1992 to talk, to have these difficult discussions, to learn about each other, to begin to understand each other's cultures, and to have some empathy and understanding for one another so that you can begin to understand that you do have things in common. I think we also have to begin to understand that what we do have in common is that government is an important way for us to get to a better solution. It's one of the most important ways. We have to have a proper representation. We have to understand that ethnic groups like Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinos, everybody, we do have political power that we should be using. It is common. We should be talking and having these difficult discussions. I agree. The media is not the main and the only problem, but it's a major contributor. Tell the full story. Tell the work that's going on in the community to keep us together.
Gerald, social media is 10 times worse than media, of which
when I'm saying media, I'm also including social media. And earlier, when you weren't on the set, I did speak to the dramatic impact that Facebook and Twitter have, because people believe what they see. Those things I've already said. I didn't want to repeat those again.
Absolutely agree there.
But again, people have to understand where this information is coming from. They have to learn to think for themselves.
Thank you, Gerald. Piyush, did you want to have?
No, I was
make a
just
comment?
endorsing the view that social media is definitely having a lot more sway in impacting the mindset and the thinking of folks. And that's something the government, I believe, is trying to do something about it. Facebook has openly admitted there was a whistleblowing case where it was proven how elections were swayed by Facebook. And now today, I hear both Instagram and WhatsApp will have a notification going if somebody has been on social media for too long. And these are some small steps in the right direction, but at the same time, content moderation, singling out any kind of misinformation away and take that down quickly is very important. YouTube is doing it right now. And I know for a fact, because they are using AI technologies that I work with to make that happen across multiple platforms. Different companies have different space of adoption. However, this is where our civic leadership, our political leadership has to come together and put pressure on these corporates so that we don't further pollute our communities, don't further pollute the minds of our youngsters.
And Gloria,
Thank you.
real quick,
Yes.
I have to say that I was drawing a blank when you first called me. And so the mainstream media really is very important for, and it's had an impact, especially with Blacks where we have been criminalized. I was working in El Paso, Texas, where I attended school at First Cafeteria. And I had a lady, Maria, look at me. And she said, she kept looking at me. And I asked her one day, why are you looking at me like that? I know you like, what's going on? She said, I have never met a Black person. You are calm. I thought all Black people were criminals. Why do you act that way? And so we have to really be careful. A lot of people are scared of Blacks because we have been pit as criminals. And fear is running rampant, even amongst ourselves. So I don't take that media lightly. It's very important for us to know how it's impacting us psychologically and how it leads to violence.
Similarly, I think there is a stereotyping in the films as well, just not media, and we should systematically address that as well at some point.
I'm going to have to move the question, move the comments on, and thank you so much for the dialogue that's taken place. The next question is, as we think about the issues of institutional and structural racism that has resulted in displacement and economic gain, how does racial capitalism impact relationships among African Americans and Asian Americans? Who would like to address that?
This is Alex. I'd like to take a stab at that. That is a deep institutional network of tentacles and hatred that, I mean, it doing good is not always enough. And having a proper financial or balance sheet is not always enough. Having the right face and or team is not always enough. Because ultimately, the prism of our own discriminatory racist ideas and beliefs, people are going to look at that and see if that's going to be undermined, changed, redirected, or anything of that nature. And in so doing, when someone looks at a project, that's what they're going to look for. They're going to look for, does this change or attack my narrative? Does this fundamentally change what I believe in? And if so, I'm not going to finance, produce, support any of those things that help that thing move along. I will find ways to bring impediments to slow this thing down, and if at all possible, stop it. The structure of the structure of capital is it's a nasty business, and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of people to speak when racism and discrimination show itself. The question becomes, in the project that you're doing, do you have enough lead time in order to get control over what it is that you're trying to do and still break down that wall and that barrier? A number of years ago, a small African-American led team out of Oakland was attempting to raise money, which is very common now, by using CRA as a vehicle. They had a Harvard MBA, a Wharton MBA, a Stanford MBA. Did I say Wharton already? Yeah, Wharton MBA and NYU MBA as a part of their team, African Americans. And they went to the big banks. And the big banks, how they even got to the table is someone said in a meeting that they couldn't find talent. And so that got out there, and these young brothers, all from the Bay Area, but all attended these top line Ivy League colleges, and said, well, we've been working for years trying to do the things that they're saying that they can't find talent for. So they amassed and put themselves together and got a meeting. And so in that meeting, they went through a litany of questions about their backgrounds, and every last one had worked for top firms. The long and the short of it was, they came back, the banks came back and said to them, we don't know that you have, quote unquote, a product and or a place where you can go and do the things that you said that you can do. They were saying that we don't see a market for you. Well, when they came back with the deal flow, the deal log, with businesses ready to go, the banks were forced to say, okay, we'll go ahead, we'll make a small investment in you. And then the first bank, upon the first tranche to be allocated, reneged. And then it took an African American who worked at that bank, who was in the meeting, to put his career on the line and say, no, that's not what you said. You said, and that forced them to make that investment. Well, it was a cascading event, because as soon as one bank made the investment, other banks started making the investment. And then the platform for that whole industry just blew up. The point I think you understand the point. It was a very hard thing to watch as a young graduate student, to see these men be attacked in the way, and I'm being very tame in the way that they were attacked before they finally got their investment. But it took the counsel that they used was Asian American. They had like 4 different counsels: Asian American, African American out of New York, a Jewish firm out of New York, and there was another firm, I forget where they were from. So I mean, it was a rainbow coalition to make these things happen. This thing never happens in a vacuum, and the structures of racism are deep, and you have to have a wide network to really attack it and to get people to come out of their comfort zone and say no. So trying not to get too passionate about it, but that's been my experience. It takes somebody to finally say that enough is enough, no. And I'm going to stand up with my brother here or my brother there, and we're going to make this thing move because it's the right thing to do, period.
Thank you, Alex. Kimberly, I know that you wanted to say something to this. We had talked about the capitalism issue. We are at a time where we need to move to the last question so that everyone has an opportunity to speak to it. So if there is something that you want to share with respect to that, please feel free.
I'm going to let other people speak and I'll jump in. Thank you, Gloria, for opening that up for me, but I'm going to let some other people speak.
So if there's someone that wants to speak to this, we only have about a minute before we need to go to the last question.
And
Let me,
Carl?
Carl, I've already spoken. If you have something you want to say, you go right ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, because I think the whole issue that we are focusing on the problems. I think we have to talk about the solutions. Okay, so it's all about decision making. Okay, whether it's in banking, politics, and who have the authority to say who gets what. It's important. So in different industry, whether it's in high tech and all that, that's the reason why we need to making sure that we push for so that whether Asian, the Black community, and many of us got to be involved so that we'll be being the decision makers as well. So we cannot just wait until people they say you can have it. So I think it's also our responsibility to push and making sure that our younger generation and us and many of you can be the decision makers. So that's the things that we need to do as well.
Thank you, Carl. And you lead us into the last question, which this is a time to grow our humanity. How can we move this needle to a place of welcoming and embracing our uniqueness and understanding our differences? Where do we go from here? What's happening in your communities? What differences are you making? Where do we go from here? And I'd like each one of you to respond to that as our last question. Payush or
Since I started, since I started the first question, I think I'll start this one, but I'm going to also try to be as short as possible because I think that there are others who are going to contribute to this and they certainly need to be heard. But without a doubt, we're going to have to be prepared to have some difficult conversations. We're going to have to include a lot more people and a lot more groups than just the African Americans and Asian Americans in those discussions. And those discussions are going to be for the purpose, in my opinion, of educating one another and getting one another to really begin to understand each other and recognize that we have things in common. I think that some of this work is already going on. And that's why I think what I'd kind of like to do is to relinquish my time, because I know that Carl is going to speak about some of the things that he's been doing. I know that there are also groups in San Francisco, CYC, Community Youth Center, which is working in the Vietnamese community to help Vietnamese community model-speaking groups to understand their neighbors, understand African-American community and vice versa, and understand the trials and tribulations that we've each been going through. And so that kind of stuff is what we need to happen. Usually the solutions and the first steps start with community organizations like the one Carl is a part of, and local churches. And that's where this is going to have to start. The pressure will build there, in my opinion, and then it goes on to the local leaders, in which there'll be some legislation. And then from there, hopefully it moves on to Sacramento and Washington, because we do need their involvement as well. So I hope that I haven't taken up too much time, but we have to get prepared for some tough discussions. We have to educate one another.
Carl?
Okay, quickly, I just keep it short. So I think education is important. Education in school, in family, in workplace, especially politics, and also media and social media. And I want to make sure that our community leaders will come out as well. We have to remember racism still existing. Discrimination is there, and let's work together. And we will talk about race. Let's talk about one race that we all can support, which is human race. If we can work together and have better understanding with each other, I think we can make those changes, and it's going to be a better world for all of us.
Thank you. Ayush?
Thank you. Great thoughts so far. I think being in others' shoes is very important, and treat others as you would want them to treat you. Basic fundamental philosophers from time immemorial have been saying that. But how do we apply that here? In our communities, I think we've got to catch them young. So basically, we've got to start with our kids. We've got to make our kids aware of the multicultural societies that we live in, and tell them to be confident in your looks, your own accents, your own behaviors. At the same time, accept the other person as they are. Not ask them to change, not expect them to change, but at the same time, live together with accepting our uniqueness, make our kids proud of our cultures, and not to feel misfits. So we'll have to treat them like this at our home, as well as we'll have to have some programs in schools promoting multicultural tolerance. And in all of this, spirituality can have a role. I've worked with an organization called International Association for Human Values for 10 years. I've been volunteering there. And I see the kind of programs they run in schools where de-stressing of kids, because kids get suicidal if they are felt as misfit. If you have to teach them something, if you have to instill good values, one of the best values you can instill is accept your neighbor as your brother, accept your neighbor as your sister, and then progress in the society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kimberly?
Okay, so right now here in Detroit, we're practicing community building in our neighborhoods with each other. And in addition to that, we're reaching out to all people and modeling the kind of behavior that we want to see in the world. We're creating the environments and the culture that we wanted to see in the world. So this is the next steps that I believe that should happen, showing compassion for each other, turning to each other, all people, and making sure that everyone is supported and taken care of.
Thank you, Kim. Alex? Are you present, Alex?
I am. What am I commenting on?
You're commenting on where do we go from here, and our timing is winding down. We wanted to hear from you, and then we need to hear from Taipei as well to close this out.
We need a catalyst that drives us back as human beings to see the community as our homes, as our extended family members, as I kind of alluded to from the way that I grew up. And I recognize that, you know, that's not possible for everybody, but it's what works for me. It's worked for me. I live in a very diverse world, and I recognize the beauty in that diversity. But that was girded because of my mother and father, my grandmother, my grandparents, and just the community as a whole. You know, playing sports is another way of really driving that, because there's no one dominant thing in sports anymore. I mean, yes, there is, but no, there isn't. And you know, if you're lucky to go to college and you get in the upper divisionals, I mean, you're going to have a wide diversity of people. So, however I could give my experience as a child growing up and the parents that I had growing up, I wish that for everybody. But if we can't get there, I'll go to the spiritual part. But it's really up to us as adults to make this happen. And I'm critically committed to that. And grab one. I've grabbed 4 along the line, and I've raised 4 kids that weren't mine. So I tell you, with the most love to all of you, that's just jump in the pool, find one.
Thank you, Alex. Taipei, we started with you and we will close with you. So please, your comments.
Thank you, Gloria. And Alex, what you said really touched me. Not long ago, Chinese American, we do live among Blacks. We mix up with the Black communities, and that particular place and the people in my mind is called Mississippi Chinese. If you have any interest, you can go back and find that. We also know that there are quite a few good mixed up community of Chinese and with the local dark-skinned people in Caribbean like Jamaica. But that's history. Now let's look forward. I want to look forward, and I want to say I have had enough of this country where people are more and more divided, and we're actually have less and less goodwill and trust towards each other, politically and otherwise, right? And I don't even want to know why and how we get here, honestly. Just like Piyush said, that we need to catch those kids when they were young. What shocked me this time, and I encourage you to see the video if you can, what shocked me this time about those 3 teenager girls on the Philadelphia train is not that they bullied others. It's not that they beat up a Chinese girl badly. Things of that happens among the kids. It is the tone that those girls, teenager, 13-year-old young girls, the way they say things, and the look in their eyes, which certainly tells me that there's not enough love or normalcy in their life, in their family, and maybe even in their immediate neighborhood. I want to catch those young girls before they grow up and it is become too late. I just want to find ways to truly help each other out and give our best and our communities resources to each other. For example, Chinese American communities, and especially in Bay Area, has a lot of human resources about the STEM, the science and technology, engineering stuff, that we can organize and offer to African American youth. But how do we do it? How do we do it in a way that is not patronizing to the Black community, in a way that is truly appreciated and needed by those kids in trouble or a bit lagging behind? And who do we partner with? You know, I tried and I wouldn't say my best, but I tried a lot to find an answer to those questions in the past few years. I don't have a good answer after a few years of searching around. I can mobilize, and we can mobilize our community through United Chinese American and other platforms on a national scale to do it, but I don't even know how to put my foot forward, so to speak, and help us, please. Thank you.
Well, I'd just like to respond, Hai-Pei. I think that we've shared, Carl and others, about there are ways that we can continue to work on this. This is not, this is a journey and not a destination. We have opportunities here to move this needle further. We recognize the tensions and the issues that have plagued our community, many of which have been fostered by social media, capitalism, and all of these other issues that you have so distinctly raised. And so with that, I would like to thank the panel and turn it back to Diana and or Hong.